For those of you who don't know me, and most of you don't, I'm Joe Hearn. As Mike mentioned, I'm the founder of Advanced Remarketing Services. The reason a lot of you people don't know me in this room is we're still relatively new to this space. Finance wasn't the first piece of work we started. So as Mike mentioned, about 12 years ago, I started the company to focus on what is essentially low-value, high-mileage, damaged, and end-of-life vehicles. My background was in salvage auctions, right? And in the years working in those salvage auctions, I saw a lot of changes. I saw a lot of transitional changes in that model. I saw the international buyer change recoveries pretty significantly. But what I also saw was the lower value, older vehicles being routinely kind of ignored. They were just treated exactly the same as the rest of the vehicles, but they weren't the same. The demand wasn't the same. The international buyer wasn't showing up for a 14-year-old automobile. The demand was finite and specific. And that idea was enough for us to kind of, myself and a couple partners, to build Advanced Remarketing, to focus on what has traditionally been a difficult segment and a very interesting segment. But one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you guys about, and it's a continuation actually of a lot of great conversations that have happened today about actionable intelligence and data pools and segmentation, is while we identified the segment and the cars were out there, the average age of an automobile in the United States right now is 12 years old. Vehicles 16 years and older is the fastest growing segment in operation. But the question was, how do you get to those cars? How do you get to them? Our entire business model is basically focused on segmenting and specifically reaching an underperforming segment of an asset group. So we develop different services to reach those specific types of assets, and you see some of them listed here. ELV Express is our service that we deliver to insurance companies to manage what is essentially predictive total loss vehicles. And by predictive, you're using data sets to identify those vehicles at first notice of loss or when those cars are damaged. We-Haul is our consumer service as well, which also needs to be tuned to the seller on the low end of the spectrum. I don't belong in a conversation about someone who's just trying to liquidate their interest in a 6-year-old vehicle, but in a 16-year-old vehicle, I do. Rough trade, same, right? We're looking for those rough vehicles get dragged onto dealers' lots for some insane trade-in deal. Those vehicles need to go into the recycling stream, and there where they'll do it. And another place where we found a huge number of these low-end and end-of-life vehicles is the car donation space, where we've raised over $175 million for charities, essentially on the same segment. So that's not about beating our chest. It's really talking about segmentation. And I'll use this as an illustration to talk about a project that we do with every client across every vertical. How do we identify the vehicles that would fit this specific and sustained appetite? And with everyone, we go through what is essentially the same project, right? First, we get shared some data. Then we do some normalization of the data. Then we do some examination of the data. And we try to understand what we're really looking at. And then we go to a process of tranching the data. And we, across, again, every vertical, will set up segments that we think where the demand or the behavior of the buyers is significant. Now, this is just an example that might give you guys a clue of what we're trying to identify. So what we're looking at, really, in my view of the world, is these bottom two tranches of vehicles. We're not really interested in the upstream volume that might be frontline ready or anything like that. Now, these are delivering the highest returns to every repossession and remarketing operation, but they're a poor fit for my buyer set, which is licensed domestic dismantlers, recyclers, and low-end buyers. But you see that the appetite is consistent in these segments, and you see that generally you can see the behaviors of those buyers gravitating to certain exchanges in that value stream. So we're doing the segmentation volume to make sure that the segments are identifiable and they're consistent and they're not insignificant. And then we're taking a look at workflow and process to figure out how we can reach those vehicles. So a lot of the conversation that we've been having today about useful information is actually things that we do in every day across every vertical. So what we end up doing is constructing rules or rule libraries that will help us identify these vehicles in the bottom two tranches. Because there's a primary economic opportunity for us here on the low end. And I use this to highlight, and for a lot of people who have experience in remarketing, you guys know this very, very well. For most of you on the repo side, you might not understand what's happening actually in the auction lanes. But what we're trying to set up is a more equitable way of exchanging these types of vehicles between buyers and sellers. So a typical car that sells at an automobile auction for around $650, about 40% of that actual gross price is actually being charged to the buyer in acquisition fees. And it's only one part of the ledger. So if you look at this, you see the obvious seller fees that you're going to inquire in: sale fee, transportation, recon, key fee. But what you don't often see in that same sample is the buyer fees that the buyer are paying. The buyer fee, the pull-out fee, the internet fee, which are all acquisition costs to them. So these low-value vehicles have never been quite as low value as you've been led to believe. And again, the appetite for these vehicles is sustained and specific. They are the most heavily recycled consumer product. The demand actually for the recycled content that we supply is national and consistent. We have over 3,400 buyers on our exchange who are focused on these types of vehicles. To be able to reach those vehicles, and Michael mentioned our technology platform, we developed NBIT, right? Which is an equitable exchange for buyers and sellers, which connects our national buyer network to our seller network in what is not a traditional auction environment. The entire application has no standing inventory or no sale date. Everything is push-based. The bidding opportunities can be as low as minutes to a few hours. Typically, we're talking about maybe just under a day in bidding time, so we can keep cycle time down, which is important to you guys, but is absolutely even more important over on the insurance side of the house, where they're incurring storage fees at a pretty terrific rate. So the application was built to allow for buyers of all sizes and appetites to compete essentially equally on the exchange. Buyers can bid by type, by location, et cetera. But you're actually talking, again, about a finite number of buyers who are operating in kind of local communities. So we try to talk to them and build an application that works for them, their varying appetites, and their limited attention spans. We mentioned earlier about sell-through rates. We can't expect to be successful if we're adding noise to process or slowing them down. If they see a car on the application, they have to know that there's a very good chance of them buying it. And that's what we do with our segmentation model. But what I'm really excited about in this space, and what is really the way of the data world right now, is just a better view of the data opportunity. We're going to be talking about our project that we're doing with Select in a minute. But Select's believed in this model for several years. Jeff and I have been talking about it for years. We've stood up in front of groups before and talked about how this is part of the future, and have tried previously and failed, because the data that we were dealing with at the time wasn't right-sized, it wasn't on time, and it wasn't reliable. What we've been doing with Resolvion has really addressed this issue. The information that you guys are getting, or that may be pulled from the repo demo, that is happening on acquisition of the vehicle now is not perfect, but it doesn't need to be for the types of vehicles that we're talking about. It is absolutely reliable. It is absolutely right sized, and the timeliness of it, which was a question in our old model, has become quite useful to us. Also, we have a broad sense of this is not just a conversation between technology companies, right? To be able to disrupt what is essentially is a real estate model, we have to be able to build our applications so they're also considering agent priorities. We have to have dynamic workflows that fit for each one of our clients' workflows, so that we are not increasing operational noise. And again, this is across all verticals, not just your space. We know that there is a lot of noise added to process by waste, and if we can't stay in front of our buyers and towers on this, there's going to be a lot of wasted effort, and I'm going to spend a lot of cooperation with my buyers, and then the program's going to suffer overall. So there's some obvious challenges to remarketing this way, but we feel like we've had enough experience and opportunity to address them. And that relates to opportunities. The segment is perfect for this type, right? We're talking about the end-of-life vehicles typically, and the voluntary repos that aren't worth repairing are a terrific fit. Age and mileage to my buyers are the top characteristics. The photos are absolutely very important, but the questions that they might have about condition and mileage and inconsistencies and damage information are far less important when we talk about this segment specifically. We know that there's a few things about this segment that are different than the repos throughout, but again, showing up in very specific ways. We talked a little bit about building a lasting solution, right, that is focused on cycle times, cooperation, and consistency. The good thing is, again, we come to this vertical kind of later, right, after we've done other hard things and have taken the good time to listen and try to understand how to be useful to the sellers in the space. So we've done a lot in that space to make the solution sticky, right? I'm going to give you guys just some broad strokes on the project that we've done here with SRG, and whether and hopefully it'll lead to some questions for you guys, because we're excited about the preliminary results. But there's a lot of manual effort that still goes into this. Michael and his team have been great. We've developed a great data exchange through API that is helping us focus on the segment and the opportunities. But there still are a lot of manual steps that go in to make sure that we can take some of the noise out of the listings, right size them, and make them consistent for our buyers. But you can see we're focused on a much older vehicle, and there's a lot of old vehicles in SRG's book. We use an average black book vehicle to give you guys a sense of kind of what we're looking at. We pick up an average of about 10 images per file, but they're not all really required for us to be useful. My buyers are most interested in the general condition of the vehicle from a photo and that the vehicle is whole. This is the primary issue. The vehicle is whole. The alloys, they're going to make a difference, but they are always dealing vehicles that are partially dismantled or missing catalytic converters and things like that. Knowing that the vehicle is going to arrive in roughly the same state as the photo was taken is a big advantage on my application. Only 19% actually have mileage. We're saving a lot of money on key charges and light ups by not necessarily delivering perfect information about that. It doesn't really matter whether or not it's 130,000 miles or 240,000 miles when we get to this end of the spectrum. Only 26% have keys, 22% have damage. The damage reporting has come a long way. It's actually, it's come a long way. Our struggle is actually homogenizing that damage information across all other offerings. So making the listing seem somewhat consistent between the damage information that we collect on an insurance total loss and the damage information that we collect in a little less reliable process from the agent is something that we spend some time on. Only about 35% of the cars that actually fit our segment are selected for remarketing right now because there's a gap in photos or a gap in information or something that just doesn't work. We're, again, being careful about the things that we list on the exchange because we want to make sure that our sell-through rates stay high. The approval sell-through rate of around 60%, we're never trying to sell through at 100, right? If we're selling through at 100, then the filter is set too narrow. If we can sell through at 75% and not add any cycle time, not add a property burden on the repo lot, then we're kind of finely tuning what we're doing, right? The number that actually get redeemed from our buyers, because our buyers will actually pick up and store the vehicle during the redemption period, is very, very low. And the average number of bids, live bids that we collect on the car in any one market is 5, which is, when you talk about, again, only between 7 or 8 buyers that would be actually a good local fit for these types of assets, it's not a bad number. And then the average gross of the awarded vehicles I put up here as well. It's not that we're underperforming the average black book, but those are the average black book across everything that fits the segment, and that's our sell-through rate at $425. So that gives you guys a little context on the project so far, and hopefully gives you enough runway to ask me some difficult questions. That's all I have for you.